This is Grafted Together with ACSI Chief Ministry Officer Jerry Nelson.
Over the last 2 decades, there has been a growing body of research affirming the impact that religious education has on the social, cultural, and even the political landscape of the United States in particular. And one of the key constructs identified in ACSI's Flourishing School Culture Model and further explored in the Flourishing Faith Index is that of spiritual formation. And what has risen to the surface is one key idea. Schools who take this seriously and seek to make this their primary aim, integrating it into every aspect of what they do, see some of the greatest gains in long-term followership of Christ and the practices that maintain that relationship. And if I were to sum up the last 2 decades of research in one phrase, it's this: spiritual formation matters. It is the aim of Christian education, and it's what sets us apart from all other forms. At ACSI, our desire is that students become faithful followers of Jesus Christ. You, the practitioner, are the most important factor in the classroom, on the field, or in the theater. We want to equip you to do your job effectively. And one of the easiest ways to get equipped is to join the Spiritual Formation Network to connect with leaders who serve as ambassadors of spiritual formation, whether a discipleship director, a campus pastor, a family ministry director, a Bible teacher, or any role where you have been designated as the point person to oversee spiritual formation initiatives in the school. This network is for you. And by joining the network, you will connect with leaders from around the world. Our goal this year is to identify 1,000 spiritual formation ambassadors from around the world and connect them with each other by the end of the 2027 school year. So to date, we have identified 315 since the launch of the network a year and a half ago, representing, 28 countries. This is truly a diverse group you want to plug into. So to join the network, go to acsi.org/spiritual formation, scroll down and click on the green Join the Network button and put your information and receive regular updates on opportunities to connect with practitioners like you. Again, that is acsi.org/spiritual formation. So joining me today to discuss the latest research on spiritual formation is someone who is no stranger to ACSI Dr. Lynn Swaner, is the president of Cardus USA, a non-partisan think tank dedicated to clarifying and strengthening through research and dialogue the ways in which society's institutions can work together for the common good. Her work focuses on flourishing educational systems in schools that enable students, educators, and communities to thrive. She is the editor or lead editor on numerous books, including Flourishing Faith, Spiritual Formation in Christian Schools, which is forthcoming here in the fall of 2026, and Flourishing Together, a Christian Vision for Students, Educators, and Schools, released in 2021, as well as Senior Fellow at ACSI, as well as the Center for the Advancement of Christian Education, also known as CASE. Dr. Swaner holds a doctorate in organizational leadership from Teachers College, Columbia University, and a diploma in strategy and innovation from University of Oxford, Saïd Business School. She previously served as a graduate professor of education as well as Christian school leader in New York. And she didn't put this in the bio, but I mean, she is personally, I think this, one of the most important people, I think, in ACSI's recent history, just with her innovative and strategic mind. Lynn Swaner, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Jerry. It is great to be with you and your listeners.
Well, again, as I say, you're definitely no stranger, but we do have a number of new listeners, just folks who are just new to Christian education in general, and I would love for them to get to know a little bit about your journey into Christian education, to ACSI, and then now on as president of Cardus.
Sure. So I started out as some of that sort of wading through that bio a little bit. I started out as an academic. I was a researcher. I was a professor of education. I was very happy in higher education, working in the education field, and I did a lot of work with flourishing in the beginning of my career. And what happened is I went on sabbatical and my oldest child went to Christian school. And so while I had the year off, I said, okay, let me see if I can volunteer, help out in the school. And that was it. I just absolutely got bitten by the bug. I said, I found what my soul loves. This is what I want to do, which is to really integrate faith and learning and to do it at a younger age, to be part of developing sort of the foundation for life, whereas previously I'd obviously worked with college and graduate students. So I jumped at the opportunity. My provost begged me to come back. I said, nope, I'm going to take some time off and do this, and rose to leadership in the school. So really, really had that practitioner experience for about 7 or 8 years in a Christian school, which was fantastic. Then ACSI came knocking and said, would you be willing to do accreditation in the region? So I said yes and started doing that. But quickly they found out I had another skill set, which was writing grants, doing research, the thought leadership, and so made space for me to be able to do that. And then over the years also to be involved with strategy and innovation. So had a fairly lengthy career in Christian education, moving from being a practitioner to working at the association level in those ways. While I was serving in ACSI, I was also a Cardus Senior Fellow, and you introduced Cardus a little bit in the bio as a think tank. And that was an incredible experience, and I was able to do some writing. Our Future Ready book that came out was co-published with ACSI and with Cardus. And then in 2024, an opportunity opened up for me to step into the role of U.S. president, which was a new role. So that was exciting to do, and I'm really grateful because I've been able to maintain relationships with ACSI, including yourself as a senior fellow, continue to do good work together, to continue to work with Christian education and Christian schools, which is so important and near and dear to my heart. And at the same time, start taking the things that we're learning in Christian schools and share that out with the larger educational sector. So to be actually able to say, this is what's happening in faith-based schools. These are the good things that are happening. And these are the things that other types of schools want to do or want to know more about. So I'm excited to actually be able to talk within the Christian school sector, and then also be able to talk about the Christian school sector externally. So that's a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I remember just many conversations, Dr. Taylor describing your movement throughout Christian education. He says you're like the person who can parachute into any environment, build relationships, build bridges. And I think, in terms of building bridges, when I look at the recent history of ACSI, you really introduce the whole concept of rigorous research. Again, when you did the not the Future Ready book, it was the oh gosh, what was the book that you did? It was the Mind Shift book. I remember at that time, it was a different way of thinking. And we were also releasing the Flourishing School Culture Model, because that was 2019, correct?
Yes.
So there was a lot of things that were just really happening at one time. And of course, none of us could really anticipate what was going to happen in 2020. But when I look at the recent history, I really see the work that you did as really elevating the work. It wasn't replacing what had taken place in the past, but it was really elevating and maybe even highlighting the work that ACSI had already done, but really propelling us into a new future. And I know one of the challenges, in the minds of many educators, especially those who have been in Christian education, let's say 30 plus years, is, okay, we understand the biblical philosophy of education. We understand this research is really important, but how do those two things go together? What's the relationship between the biblical philosophy of education and the research that's surfacing now?
That's a really important question. I'm so glad that you asked it. I think we have to go back. We have to go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Actually, to answer that question, we have to go back to the way that God has created us in His image. One of the first recorded task that we see in scripture for human beings is Adam gets to name the animals, right? So it's actually this sort of categorization, impartation of information, analysis, right? Like creativity. You see this from the beginning. And I think, we talk about the different ways of knowing. Obviously we have the Word of God, which is the most important, revealed to us. We also have sort of general revelation. We can look around and see God's creation and his handiwork. And also because we're created in the image of God, we have certain capacities we've been endowed with by our Creator. So we can ask good questions. We can look to answers. And I think this is part of his desire for us in having dominion over the earth, and loving and serving each other, and loving him with our minds, is to be able to ask those questions, to be able to look and say, okay, we can do this, but how can we do it better? What does this actually look like? So our biblical philosophy we bring to education, we bring to research. Research is never values neutral, just like schooling is not values neutral. We want to ask really good questions. We want to be open to the possibilities that the data will show us. And what I've seen over the years, and this makes complete sense, is that what we see in the data, even if it might surprise us, still very much supports the things that we know to be true about the way God has created us, the formational responsibility that we have as parents, as educators, as schools. So I would just sort of summarize it up, is to say research is another way of understanding and exploring God's good creation. Does that mean it can't be used for evil, just like anything can? We think about technology, we think about media, of course. We're living in a fallen world. But and I think you and I have talked about this at other times, is the answer to misuse is not non-use, it's proper use.
Yeah,
So
that's good.
so
That's
we
good.
really want to be very rigorous in what we do. We want our research to be able to stand the tests of the field, right? To be able to say this is as rigorous as they come. This is gold standard work. So we don't want to do subpar work. And we want to make sure that we're asking questions that are important, that are aligned with the things that we know to be true. And as a result, a lot of the research that Cardus does is to ask questions that nobody else is asking. When you think about schools, a lot of the questions about outcomes are academic or are related to careers. We're asking those questions, yes, but we're also asking about faith formation and civic formation and family formation, things that we know to be essential to human development and flourishing.
Right. Yeah. And what I've appreciated just interacting with yourself and, the other fellows, of ACSI and some at Cardus, is there's this general understanding, and posture that, hey, we're not trying to put research on par with special revelation. We actually look at what scripture says, and we try and ask questions and investigate. If I'm hearing this correctly, you investigate what scripture says and really see how that's manifesting in reality. That's what you're investigating. And I really like the idea of really asking a good question, and learning to ask the right questions as well. And so I, at least in my own experience, I've appreciated research because it helps me. It actually trains me when I read good research to learn to ask good questions. There's one other thought that I wanted to share just to kind of highlight what you're saying. In one of the confessions of faith, it says that scripture is our final rule in faith and practice. Then it goes on to say that those things that are not set down in scripture are to be governed by the light of nature, which is basically common sense. It's like, use your brain and investigate, the other things that are not expressly set down. And so I really see research really being a powerful tool. I know that it's been powerful even now, because I continue to draw upon the studies that you guys continue to do. Cardus, Flourishing School Culture Model, Flourishing Faith Index. But I remember my first interaction with Cardus. It was actually 2014. And I remember getting that report because I think that was the first report that I remember that ACSI had done any type of endorsement with. I don't know if ACSI was a sponsor of it. I can't remember exactly, but I remember receiving that report, and it highlighted the importance of religious education. And of course, it was comparing Protestants and Catholics. And I know personally, as an educator, I immediately integrated that into my presentations at my school, just really striving to make the case. And it's really cool to see that that research has continued to today. And so can you talk a little bit about where Cardus has come from? I know Cardus started in 2011, but the first report that I received was 2014. And then there was other iterations of that report, and now another report has just been released on 2000 this year. So can you talk about just the journey that Cardus has been on and connect the dots for our listeners in terms of the research that has been published, this year?
Sure. So it's interesting because this definitely intertwines with sort of my own journey in Christian education. So I remember the first reports started coming out in 2012, and there was another iteration that came out, sort of almost every 2-3 years. So this has been the fourth time the Cardus Education Survey has been done in the US. It's also done in Canada. So we just finished the fourth time, and we're about to launch a second time in Australia. So I remember where I was in 2012 when I saw the report. I nearly fell out of my chair. I was in my Christian school, and it was the first time I'd actually seen hard data on the outcomes of Christian schooling. Of course, we have our own school-based data, but that's not, those are of students that go to our schools, which is important. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't any comparative data between graduates of Christian schools and other sectors. So I like I said, I almost fell out of my chair because I knew what I was looking at. And then, fast forward to today, it's just funny when you think about, God sort of weaving our stories together, that now that's something that I'm leading all these years later. So the Cardus Education Survey is fairly unique in the world of research, and it's worth spending just a quick second or two unpacking it. So what this survey is, that again has now been done 4 times in the US, is it's different in a few ways from your typical research. First of all, it looks at adults aged 24 to 39. So these are not people who are currently in school. These are people who are graduates. They're out there, living their adult lives. And it asks questions about a range of outcomes. So it talks, we look at educational attainment, we look at civic formation, as I mentioned, faith formation, family formation. New for this year was mental health and well-being. And then also, what are the kinds of personal values that people have? So that's what unique. One of the things that's unique. Another thing that's unique is we use Ipsos, which is a polling firm. So, of course, if you're familiar with Gallup or other polling, it's similar to that. And what these polling firms have is they have a panel of nationally representative adults. And so if you give these folks a survey, you're going to get as close to a picture of what's going on in a given country as you can. Of course, it's never perfect, but you can draw some observations about the American experience of whatever it is that you're looking at. And what we are looking at specifically is, again, these holistic outcomes, and comparing those outcomes among those who attended your traditional public schools, those who attended Protestant Christian schools, those who attended Catholic schools, those who attended non-religious independent schools, or who were homeschooled. And so, and the last thing I'll mention is we control for a range of key demographic variables. So, for example, we know what happens in the family is often much more impactful, if you will, than anything that happens in the school. So things like, were there 2 parents in the home? What was the mother's level of education? Was the person raised in a faith-based home? I mean, that's really important. So that when we compare outcomes, we're comparing the outcomes for people who are, no 2 people are exactly alike, but at least we can say we've screened out these different demographic variables. So we can actually say we're estimating that attending this type of school makes this difference for these outcomes. Right. So again, it's worth unpacking because it's quite different to most of the research that you see in the education sector, and that's what makes it really unique. So that's a little bit about that research. The new reports that have come out is pulling out of the 2023 data. Those we've issued now 4 reports on that. We've done also a report on the homeschooling sector. And this new report that we're talking about today really looks at the enduring faith, if you will, the enduring faith outcomes of Christian schooling over the last decade or so.
And you're pulling, and I was just reading what you were doing. You're pulling from um, 2014 to 2023. You're studying that data, correct?
Yes. So we're asking
And
how
what?
have things
Mhm.
changed over those 10-ish years based on those
Okay.
findings? Yes.
I got you. I want to read a couple of quotes, get your reaction to it, and then feel free to dive into what the key findings are. But I believe I first heard you talk about this. I believe this was at the Mental Health Symposium, or was it at FSI? I'm beginning to blend events now, but it was good to see you at both of them. But I want to read I think it was the conclusion to the report. And I believe that you quoted this at one of those events. It says schools that most deeply and coherently live out their mission are likely best equipped to nurture graduates whose faith endure and flourish into adulthood. And the sentence before that, it mentions the importance of intentionality, and it mentions the importance of that, and that really stuck out to me, and just really highlighted obviously the uniqueness of Cardus report. I want to read one more statement here that really stuck out to me in the report, and again, just all right, here it is. I guess this is part of your key findings here. Yeah, it says the CSC findings suggest that the relative strength of a school's emphasis on religious formation, how fully its mission is enacted in the school's programs and curricula, may play an important role in shaping graduates' faith-related outcomes and values. And so I can just tell you, as someone who's, fully immersed in the spiritual formation space, I mean, you say in 2012 you remember where you were. I think you say you fell out your chair. It's like I was doing a yes. We've known this for a long time, and it's just great to have the data here to really affirm what we've been doing all these years. But unpack some of the key points, key findings from this study.
So I think one of the frustrating things for me as a practitioner, which I've now been able to sort of address a bit through research or understand a bit through research, is sort of this sense, or we get told as practitioners that Christian schools are terrible at spiritual formation, right? Horrible outcomes. We need to be doing better, et cetera. And then usually the people who are saying things like that are like, and the answer to that is get this curriculum or do X, Y, X, Y, Z. So I think and the picture is a bit more complex, and I think this research shows that. So the first thing, by looking at the comparison from over the 10 years, those 2 data points, if you will, or snapshots, is that what we've found over that decade is that Protestant Christian schools, when you compare them to Catholic schools, non-religious independent schools, public schools, our graduates are much more likely to pray regularly, to read scripture, and to attend religious services on at least a weekly basis. When we look at the individual reports, we also see that Christian school graduates are much more likely to say that they believe in God, that they believe in life after death, religion is an important value to them, et cetera. So Christian school graduates also are volunteering at higher levels and giving charitably at higher levels. So it's not just sort of if you will, the propositional pieces, it's also how it gets lived out in their lives. So that's looking writ large across the sector. And this is really clear. I mean, the numbers are just stunning.
Hmm.
We look not just for, how big is the difference, but does that difference persist after we've controlled for all those variables that I mentioned? It does. And are they statistically significant? And they are at some of the highest, some of the rather lowest p values that you can possibly get. So it's a
Hmm.
really, really big difference in outcomes if you attend a Christian school when it comes to these various sort of measures of religiosity. You can call them spiritual formation. They're called measures
Hmm.
of religiosity in the research. So that's looking writ large. So if somebody says, Christian schools are terrible, et cetera, that is not the case. That is not the
Yeah.
case when you look across Christian schools. It's just not. We're doing better than any other sector. What this current report also shows is not just that stability over many years. And I should mention that that stability continues even though in every sector, like religious service has dropped. And we know that
Hmm. Yeah.
COVID and online live, et cetera. We know all that. We see
Hmm.
we see the data out there that the attendance in religious service has dropped. That has happened for Christian school graduates also, but they're still significantly higher than in any other sector of school graduates. Okay. So that's the big picture. What we did in what we ask in the survey is we ask a unique question. We ask graduates to rate how well their school prepared them for a number of
Hmm.
things. So we say, success in a career, post-secondary education, relating to those who are different than you, all these different kinds of questions. One of the questions that we ask is, how well did your high school prepare you for having a vibrant spiritual or
Right.
religious life? So what we
Hmm.
did was we looked at that and we divided the respondents into two groups. If they said, really well or exceptionally well, we call those strong preparation. So those are people who
Hmm.
say their school strongly prepared them for that vibrant spiritual or religious life. Those who didn't say that, so they were kind of neutral or they were like, it didn't prepare me really well, we said weak preparation. So we split them into two groups. And then what we did was we reran all of the analyses, and the differences were striking. So, and
Hmm.
this is unpacked in the report. It's available freely online. People can download it. You can even download the figures individually if
Hmm.
you want to
Hmm.
pop that into a PowerPoint to share with
Yep.
your board, etc. The differences were striking. When when graduates said my school really well prepared me for a vibrant spiritual religious life. Levels of Bible reading, much higher. Levels
Yeah.
of prayer, much higher. Religious service attendance, much higher. And
Yeah.
in addition to that, same for their personal values. So religion as a value, much higher. Interestingly, marriage and having children as values, much higher than
Hmm.
Christian schools where the graduates said didn't really prepare me well for a vibrant
Yeah.
spiritual life. And so what's important to know, and this is sort of like the caveat, you always have to have the limitations of the research section, this, is that, these are correlational findings. They're not causational. They're pretty
Hmm.
strong. There is a question of what we would call endogenous effects. So, for example, if
Hmm.
somebody has a really strong walk with the Lord and they look back at their high school, are they more likely to say that prepared me really well? So there's a bit of that. So we can't say
Yeah.
absolutely 1,000%, but it gives us a glimpse into the fact that, and sort of solves this conundrum a little bit for us, which is, Christian schools are not doing terrible writ large. They're doing really, really well in terms of spiritual formation of students. And when a school, and this was the quote that you read, when a school takes this seriously and lives out its formational mission and really prepares its students, its graduates well for that vibrant religious or spiritual life, it makes a difference.
What surprised you? Any surprises that came out of this the research?
Yes, I think the one of the surprises for me, and I don't know if it was necessarily a surprise, but I know one of the kind of enduring complaints that we've had with the survey is that, Catholic schools in particular, we present them as kind of they're a sector. There's a lot of diversity in Catholic
Hmm.
schooling, right? You've kind of got elite high schools, you've got your,
Right.
neighborhood local school that could be
Yeah.
potentially in an urban center.
Right.
And you've also got independent Catholic schools now. Some of them have, classical curricula
Right.
and
Yep.
structures.
Mhm.
Many of them, particularly look at like Catholic hybrid schools. These newly founded Catholic schools are very, very strong on their formational mission. So one of the questions that we've always got is, if there's a somebody who's a Catholic school educator who's really, very strong on the formational mission of the school, they don't see themselves in the data. So if you look at this
Mm,
report, everything that I just described, the levels are lower for Catholic schools in general, but we see the same difference. So if
mm.
somebody attended a Catholic school and said their school prepared them really, really
Okay.
well for a vibrant spiritual religious life, all those outcomes are higher. So again, they're still a bit lower than your Protestant Christian school, but again, that strong preparation makes a difference. So I think that kind of scratches an itch, if you will, for those who are in Catholic education who are really serious about formation, and particularly those newer schools that have been founded specifically around
Yeah.
formation.
Yeah, one thing that came to mind as you were talking about the importance of this is, and I just wanted to throw this out there for our listeners, this is really good tool, not just for a board presentation or making the case in admissions or even reinforcing that with the parents that are still in school. I really see this, and I know that Cardus works in this area. Really see this as a public policy tool as well for advocacy, for local leaders, state, federal leaders who have questions about the importance of or the good that religious education adds to uh, the social sector, the cultural sector, political sector. I think the evidence is really here that the schools who are really doing it well. Again, this is not all schools, and we know this. Some schools they're nominally Christian in name only, but those schools who are really doing it well, there's a significant value add to the entire nation and to the entire country. So I really wanted to point that out. Anything alarmed you or gave you pause in the study? I know that's loaded, but answer it as best as whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, so I think it's tied to what you actually just shared. So this report that we're discussing today is one of actually four that have come out from the
Mhm.
2023 data set. Um, Actually, our report on the homeschooling sector has been cited in The Economist. It was just cited in The Hill last week. I mean, it's kind of that's the one that is getting a lot of attention because
Mhm.
it busts some of the myths. Again, it's looking at the data. What actually homeschooling is not monolithic, right? It turns out that sort of
Mhm.
the for lack of a better term, cradle to grave homeschooling or,
Yeah.
cradle to grade 12 homeschooling, that's a minority of those who homeschool. The majority of
Mhm.
folks who homeschool are kind of jumping in and out. Not
Right.
all parents are choosing that for their children at all times, right? So it's not, and outcomes vary based on the length of time and homeschooling, et cetera. So again, looking at data to do some kind of myth busting. And the
Mhm.
original, when the survey first, when the data first came out, back in 2011, 2012, the myth busting there was exactly what you're saying, which is, wait a minute, religious schools are not creating these, sort of segregated group of zealots that can't function in society, right? In fact, their political engagement, some of the earlier surveys, political engagement of
Right.
of these is fairly similar.
Right.
The political engagement of Christian school graduates in our earlier surveys is similar to public schools. So
Mhm.
that's really, you can think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but just
Yeah.
showing that, but busting some of these myths around faith-based schools. And, at Cardus, we talk about all education is public education because it's serving the
Mhm.
public good. There are
Mhm.
obviously funding implications for that,
Right.
right?
Right.
So we
Right.
would support school choice measures, et cetera. So, to your question, sort of what was surprising, I'm going to telescope back from this specific report and just look at the overall data. And again, all these reports can be freely
Mhm.
downloaded if you just Google Cardus Education Survey, 2023 and 2024. I think Surprising finding, for us, one good surprising finding is when we look at the 2011, 2012 data, Christian schools were lagging behind public schools in academic outcomes. We've now closed that gap.
Mm,
Not significantly ahead, but closed the gap. And I think that's really important. When I started in Christian education, the schools that I knew in my area very much were saying, kind of academically, we're on par with the public schools, but spiritual formation is kind of our thing. That's what we focus on.
yeah,
You'd be kind of harder pressed to find a school that doesn't have a richer understanding of their mission now,
yeah,
right? A richer understanding of, to do all things with excellence, that we want
right.
actually an integration of faith and learning, right? So
Hmm.
you'd be
Hmm.
hard pressed. I think there's been a lot of change over the last decade that I can observe anecdotally, and we're seeing that in the data. So that was a good surprise. Um, Another surprise, which was a little bit more, I wouldn't call it good or bad, but just interesting and something that we want to think about, is that compared to all other sectors, Christian school graduates were most likely to rate their relationship with peers and their sense of belonging at their Christian school lower than other sectors.
Mm,
So now it's important to remember these are graduates 24 to 39. These are not the students that are in our schools now. And these students also, these graduates were not in our schools during COVID.
yeah,
So then people will say, well, if you think about 24 to 39-year-olds, that was the iPhone generation. Absolutely. But so were all the other students in other sectors, right?
yeah,
So I've been trying to encourage Christian schools to say, look at the gains that we made on the academic side just by being intentional, by thinking about this. Let's also think about peer relationships in our Christian schools.
mm,
Let's also
mm,
think about helping students. If we admit students to our schools, I'm not making a comment in any way, shape, or form about admissions policies. But if we say this student, this family is admissible to our school, we think they're mission aligned, we want them at our school, we have an obligation to ensure that they know that we want them there and that they
yeah,
belong at our school and that we care about them, right? We want
hmm,
them to grow and develop. Now, that doesn't mean we leave everybody, if you brought in a kindergartner and they graduated with a kindergarten level of reading, that would be educational malfeasance, right? So we don't want
yeah,
people to
yeah,
come in and say, "Hey, you belong. You don't have to change. You don't have to do anything. Just sort of coast through." That's not what we're doing. That's certainly not the gospel. But there is sort of this sense of you're here, you belong.
hmm,
And that's how do we do that through, different methods. We see schools that are doing things like house systems in middle school, which is
yeah,
a really, really um, fraught age, if you will, developmentally and socially. So schools are being really intentional and saying, we're
right,
not going to leave our students to sort of meander through middle school and hope they make it out on the other side, right? We're going to actually build community and build belonging
yeah,
in ways that are aligned with our biblical philosophy of
right,
education, right? So I think that's a good challenge for schools to think about. It's never a bad thing to think about the experience that students are having in the school, and can we improve that, building gospel-centered community in the process.
yeah. I want to just highlight a word that you mentioned when you were describing the 2014 and 2023 report. You used the word snapshot, and the way that I've shared with especially a lot of spiritual formation directors, and we've really worked hard to try and encourage them. And like, you need to do some type of assessment to really understand where you are. And I said, you're basically taking a high resolution picture. I mean, that's how I really look at the whole idea of, a really, really good, assessment. You're taking a high resolution picture. And what I see in this report, it's given us a high res shot. It's kind of looking at the receding glaciers, over the polar ice caps. It's like they take pictures. It's not telling the whole story, but it is giving us an idea of what's going on. And I really see that um, this report in particular, again, being 1 and 4, has really given us some good information on some things that we can celebrate, but some areas where we can really make some significant improvements. You've mentioned a lot of excuse me. You've mentioned a lot of key points or key ways in which the leaders can use this. As you said, they can download the report. They can take these graphs and import them into their PowerPoint presentation. Mention about sharing them with boards. I mentioned emissions. Use this for public policy as well. But not every leader is as savvy with research. I'm sure they would hear this and say, man, Lynn, all of this is great and it resonates me and it encourages me. What advice would you give to, let's say both groups, the people who are savvy with research, who really gravitate towards it, and the people who say, man, thank you for these findings. How should they use this effectively? Are there some talking points? What do you recommend as a researcher, but also as a former practitioner within the school?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing is actually just to access the reports, download them. Like you've alluded to, there are key points in the front, which is essentially like an executive summary if you don't want to get in depth. So again, you can just Google Cardus Education Survey 2024, search for it, and it'll come up, and you can access those 4 reports and also all the historical reports. So I think that's the first thing. It's download them. And then I think share and make plans to discuss them with various sort of strata, if you will, of your school. So, I think this is really good for board education.
Mm-hmm.
I've written elsewhere about how if you don't intentionally educate your board about what's happening in Christian education, they are not blank slates. They will bring their own experience to it. So, so we can pretend they're blank slates who are, going to just stick with policy governance. Well, if you go to any of the Fortune 500 companies and you look at their board training, it always includes something about the field in which they're governing. So they know just some basic information about what's happening. So I would absolutely use these reports for ongoing board education and training, just so your board members are aware of the institution that they're governing, where it sits on the landscape. So I think that's important. Certainly leadership teams, it can be a great discussion piece in your ongoing meetings. And also I think your marketing and development team needs to have this data. I think we see this in our own work. I work for a think tank, so I do a lot of fundraising, and a lot of our patrons and donors are savvy. They want to see data. Well, here's data that shows that investing in Christian education as a model, it pays off in the long term. So I think that's important to share with those teams. And then I would say also with teachers and parents. Teachers need to know. I do this all the time when I speak to groups that include teachers and faculty. I just did this last week to about 260 folks from 3 different schools. I said a lot of times we hope and we experience a student coming back after they graduate and saying, you were really a tough teacher. I didn't like you, or I didn't like this class, but I want to tell you how God used it, and I want to just like, right. So we get those glimpses and those snapshots. But I've shared this data with teachers and they've cried because they've just said, I see it in black and white. I see the data now that this actually makes a difference. And they need that level of encouragement because teaching is full on, right? I mean, the stress that teachers have is at the same level as first responders, EMTs, emergency room nurses. I mean, they need to know that what they do makes a difference. And this is really good data that shows them that. You mentioned advocacy. We always suggest that, and a lot of our reports are written in such a way that they're practitioner friendly and they're advocacy friendly. So to be able to take that data and say, here are the outcomes of our sector, and they're on par with, and in some cases better than, the outcomes of other sectors. And certainly, again, that myth busting around what faith-based schools do. So I think that's a sort of a sweep of how this might be used. Think tank is a little bit different to other types of organizations in that we don't charge for what we do. We
Mm,
fundraise to do what we do, but we don't charge. This is available freely. So, just we want this data to get out there because we know in the hands of practitioners, in the hands of stakeholders, and in the hands of advocates, it's going to be really valuable. So,
yeah.
just share it, get it out there. It's for you.
Yeah, all practical, very easy things I think to implement for our school leaders, accessible. I mentioned in the bio, just kind of wrap up our time. I mentioned in the bio, in your bio, that you have a book coming out, and from what I understand, that book really highlights some of the practical aspects of we talked about the what's going on in the research. We understand that schools that are intentional about integrating faith and learning, making sure that's connected with their mission, that there's a higher rate of those students living out their faith, past graduation. But as we talked about, it's like, okay, yeah, I hear you, but how do I actually do that? So, what I understand, that's what your book is about, right?
Yes,
So,
that's
go ahead
correct.
and tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the book
Yeah.
that's coming out this fall.
So the first book, Flourishing Together, was based on ACSI's Flourishing Schools research. And the response that we got to that book, and also just to the research sort of sharing it out at different ACSI conferences and different places, was this is great. This is a really great 30,000-foot view of how our schools can flourish in the different domains. And we really want to know more about how our schools can flourish in the area of spiritual formation. So, how our students,
Mm,
how our faculty, our families, our leaders, there was this deep hunger and deep desire to go deeper. And so what we
mhm,
did in the early 2020s was actually we raised ACSI raised $250,000 to to do that research. So we essentially replicated the methodology of the Flourishing Schools research, but looked very deeply at spiritual formation in Christian schools. So
mhm.
the same sort of rigorous piloting, testing, refinement, all that that we did, and this is all sort of listed out in those reports, so people can see how we did it. And what we found was that, not shockingly, that actually there seemed to be these clusters of different things that actually work in Christian schools when it
Mm,
comes to spiritual formation. So spiritual formation is, for the sake of sort of organizing principle, involves that the head, so
mhm.
understanding, intellect, sort of those propositional pieces. It includes the heart, which are those sort of affect, yes, but also will, volition,
Yeah.
sort of your
Uh-huh.
desires, your orientation
Hmm.
towards the things of God. And then also the hands. How do you actually live this out? We talked a little bit about this already. Are you serving others? What are you actually doing with your faith? C.S. Lewis talks about sort of trying to figure out what's more important, belief or action. Is like trying to figure
Hmm.
out which blade of the scissor is more right. So like, and we see
That's
that in
good. Yeah.
James, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't have faith without actually living that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what this research found, and then also found a number of things in each of those areas that Christian schools do. And when they do them, we see spiritual formation outcomes higher for students, for educators, etc.
Hmm.
So I'll just like rattle off a couple of them, but in terms of the intellectual of the mind, worldview training, integrating faith and
Right.
teaching,
Right.
um, distinctively Christian education, faith-based accreditation are a few of them.
Hmm.
For that nurture, for that heart, mentoring, having a supportive culture, faithful friends,
Right.
peer encouragement. We talked a little bit about that. Parental encouragement, partnership with parents, and partnership with churches. And then for that practical side, the hands, the board comes up a lot, guarding the mission,
Hmm.
leadership, missional hiring, special education inclusion. We found this in our original research, very important and boosts outcomes, spiritual outcomes for everyone in the school, not just with students with
Right.
disabilities. Having biblical perspectives on current issues, equipping for good work, which is this kind of, how do we actually help students to understand how to be uh, conscientious financially, and
Right.
this sort of those life skills, if you will. Sabbath keeping, which is making sure
Mm,
that we're not in a litigious or legal way, but to actually say, God has ordained for us to rest. How do we do that?
yeah.
How do we honor the Sabbath? And then family devotions and
Hmm.
parental protection. So that's more that online sort of parents guarding, helping to guard their
Yeah.
students. And you might say, well, some of those have nothing to do with the Christian school. Well, we found out is actually when the Christian school engages these things,
Yeah.
like helps family devotions, right? It
Hmm.
just strengthens that compounding effect. So,
Yeah.
obviously the Christian school is not the church. The Christian school is
Hmm.
not the family/parents. And it makes a lot of sense. What we find is that when those are aligned and working really well together, it
Yeah.
has a powerful boost to the spiritual formation outcomes that we're looking for. So
Yeah.
that's sort of just an overarching kind of thing. The book is like Flourishing Together. The book is not chock full of research language. It's more based for practitioners, for people who are in the
Yeah.
trenches, who are working in Christian schools, whether you're a leader, a teacher, you're in charge of spiritual formation efforts, you're a board member, to actually be able to read through and say, what does this mean? There's a lot of reflective
Yeah.
activities and different things that you can do as a team. So it's not a pure research report at all. It really is translating that into practice for folks.
Yeah, and I imagine that those who are already familiar with the Flourishing Faith Index, it's really gonna assist them in that translation effort. Lynn Swaner, this has been great. I want to give you the final word. Any final words to our listeners, leaders, practitioners, teachers, spiritual formation directors?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said intentionality. One of the things that we can see in the data is that for example, with the academic outcomes, when Christian schools spend 10 years working diligently at something, you see the change in the data. We can
Mm,
see it. And so I think that just supports the notion that, when we put our hand to the plow, when we're intentional about
yeah,
things, and when those are things that matter, when there are things that we know make a difference in the lives of our students, both for this life and the next to come, it makes a difference. And I think that's encouraging. I think it's a challenge because we do have to spend that time and be intentional. But at the end of the day, we're going to do school anyway, right? Those students
hmm
are coming. They're probably already there
yeah,
because we're recording this podcast. It's early August. You're
yes.
gonna they're gonna spend the X number of hours there anyway. Might as well have it be hours that are intentionally spent in ways that we
Yeah.
know make a difference.
That's awesome. Lynn Swaner, thank you so much. Dr. Lynn Swaner, great friend of ACSI, Trailblazer. Man, this has been a pleasure to unpack this. So, listeners, please make sure you uh, um, check your Amazon or wherever it's going to be sold for Flourishing Faith, the book that's coming out this fall. Make sure you download the Enduring Faith report from Cardus. And then also, I want to remind you if you want to hear more about what school leaders are doing in the field, check out episode 58 on assessing your school and the Flourishing Faith Index interview I did with Dr. Steve Whitaker down at the First Academy in Orlando. Dr. Lynn Swaner, thanks again for joining the Grafted Together podcast.
Thanks so much, Jerry. It's been a lot of fun. Great to be with you.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.